For those that are just joining us today, this is actually the third webinar series we've done. We've covered a whole range of different things in kind of construction, digitalization, and loads of different topics. And this is session 2 of this series webinar. So today's session is top down or bottom up, the challenges of planning tools and techniques. So as I said, this is the second in this webinar series. Just before Christmas, we did why are we still struggling to deliver projects on time? So all of our previous webinars and all of the ones from the previous series are on our website, which is VisiLean.com/webinar. And you can also register for our upcoming webinars as well. So those of you who've joined us before, we always kind of start by kind of reviewing the state of the construction industry and the status of everything. So we've put together these figures from loads of different sources. McKinsey is a really good source if anyone needs any sort of data like this, amongst other ones. And these were some quite alarming statistics that we've brought up. So I'll go through them. So 68% of trades point to poor schedule management as the key contributor to decreased labor productivity. So we're saying there that most of the trades, nearly kind of all of them, are saying that poor planning is leading to kind of poor productivity, and that's causing issues on construction projects. 45% of construction professionals report spending more time than expected on non-optimal activities. And we see this a lot wherever we go around the world with VisiLean, that people are spending a lot of time on non-value adding activities, things kind of like manual data entry and stuff like that. That's a non-value adding activity. If we can automate things like that, then we're going to save time and become more efficient. But we'll touch upon that later as well. 77% of mega projects around the globe are 40% or more behind schedule. Now, if we think of the costs associated with some of these projects, and if they're delayed, those can run into millions, hundreds of millions, some of them, okay? So there's loads of scope to become more efficient. This next one I found really interesting, and it's kind of a hot topic with me at the moment. So subcontractor dependence on spreadsheets decreased only 1% from 2018 to 2019, okay? And this is important to me because if I go back to that 45% of non-optimal activities, updating a spreadsheet is a very manual, monotonous task, okay? But it's something that has to be done on a construction project because you need progress updates and things like that. But with all the innovation, all the new tools, all the new digital tools out there, this process needs to become more efficient and automated. That is a non-value adding activity. And we haven't really progressed away from Excel in loads of, in the last few years at all. So there's room there to really kind of improve performance. 25% of all projects grow past scope of work in the field by over 30%. So we're all aware of variations, changes, client requirements changing. How do we manage that process, and how do we become more efficient, and how do we mitigate the impact of those changes? It's something we'll touch on this webinar series. And then lastly, and probably most alarmingly, large projects typically take 20% longer to finish than scheduled and are up to 80% over budget. Now, to be 80% over budget on some of the projects we're seeing and some of the projects out at the moment, that again could be tens of millions, hundreds of millions. And even on a smaller project, to be 80% over budget and to run over time could be really horrific for a small company. You could go bust and things like that if you're a smaller company living job to job. So we need to get better at utilizing the tools that are out there and becoming more efficient. So this webinar is on top-down and bottom-up planning. So conventional planning or traditional planning, and we see this all wherever we go, kind of looks like this kind of structure. So we get a very high-level top management program created. It's usually kind of a contractually agreed program with the client, mostly kind of milestones and durations. But there's a high level of estimation in this program, and it's not very accurate. There's not much evidence used to generate this program. It's done on past projects and things like that. not much involvement from any stakeholders or subcontractors or the people actually executing the work. That program then gets passed down to the project planners, still very high level, hasn't reached the site office yet, it's still in the kind of head office environment. They then make a bit more of a detailed program, but again, not much involvement from the people who are actually going to have to execute the work, or the people on site that know the kind of constraints that are associated with certain tasks and the actual site itself. Then, so those planners push that program down to site, and a lot of it has been based on kind of assumed durations, estimations, guesswork. So we've got a lot of unrealistic targets. Okay, so these project managers are now having to fight to meet these very unrealistic targets. They then push that work down to the foreman and workers, and at this point, it's just constant firefighting. They're being forced to meet unrealistic targets, and that's causing loads of issues. We're getting the blame game, we're getting all sorts of problems occur, and it's leading to delays and increased costs. So the problem with this kind of conventional planning is based on assumptions. There's no collaboration with the teams. We're not involving subcontractors. We're not involving the people that do the work at an early stage. So everything's based on guesswork. And by the time it gets to site, it's kind of putting out fires. At this kind of, in this way, people are planning in silos. So the planner, those kind of high-level planners are planning in isolation, they're planning in silos, they're planning on their own. Again, not much information being passed between teams. So again, that's ending us up with unrealistic targets. This leads to less reliable project plans. We're getting more and more kind of plans in isolation. People on site are having to move things around, meet these unrealistic targets. They're sending information back to the planners are updating, and we've forgotten where we actually started, what the baseline was. We've got so many different programs coming from different places, it's causing issues. The push of these plans to the people out on site causes a lot of pressure. They're being told to meet unrealistic targets. When it doesn't happen, everyone's looking to blame someone, okay? This is something we've mentioned in all of the other webinars, but there's a clear lack of communication. Whether that's because the site's so big, people don't come back to the office, or communication's bad, phone network's bad, people just aren't by their desk or whatever, communication is bad. Because of everyone working in silos, some people working in different softwares, we've got kind of a load of different plan and a load of different updates coming from different places. So that's leading the planners to just constantly be updating and rescheduling. So planners aren't actually free to go and execute to plan progressively, to really understand the complexities of the project with all the people involved. What they're doing is just updating. More often than not, they're not free to actually go out and plan. Because of all the information coming from so many places, they're just they're just rescheduling and updating kind of manual softwares and things like that, like P6 and Excel. So most of you will be familiar with this kind of image, or it's probably experienced it on the site yourself. Two people about to start some work. The gentleman on the left, the drawings aren't matching the conditions here. We need the latest revision. So unfortunately, they haven't collaborated with the design team. They haven't collaborated with the people who are running the project. And unfortunately, they can't start work because they haven't got the latest drawings. Gentleman on the right, there's no clearance for this job on site. How is it in this week's production plan? So with his best intention, he's gone to site trying to execute this activity, and there's been no clearance because there's been no collaboration between the teams. Probably a predecessor activity hasn't finished yet, and so he can't start and get his clearance. Also, there's been no make ready process here. So make ready is something we really advocate at VisiLean, and there should have been something in place that the week before this was due to start, or a few days before, someone checked that all of these things were in place for them to start. Okay, if that had happened, they would have caught these issues then, and then there probably wouldn't have been a delay. So the two planning techniques I'm going to talk about today, as mentioned, so we'll start with the top-down planning approach, and that's very target-based. So at a very early stage, probably at the tender stage, the key milestones and durations are met, and this is normally kind of a contractual agreement. This helps with the early structure of works. Obviously, you need to get in your mindset of when you'll need certain trades on site, certain labor, certain materials, things like that. And it's essential for billing, okay? Being able, the clients will probably rely on this to draw down on certain funds and stuff like that, and potentially the contractor themselves. Then we move to the bottom-up approach, which is much more collaborative. So this defines the actual flow. So people on site, the teams, the packages, the subcontractors, all kind of communicate and collaborate. And then you can break down those key milestones into the actual flow of activities and the sequence of works that are actually going to happen. Now, the more people that are involved, the more collaboration, the more you can discuss constraints and identify problems before they become big problems. If people aren't collaborating, by the time an issue arises, it's probably going to be bigger than it could have been. Okay, we could, if we're collaborating and getting everyone involved at an early stage, we can really try and reduce these issues. And the bottom-up approach allows for kind of commitment-based planning. So if you're involving the people that are actually going to do the work, getting them to commit to their own activities and saying, okay, I can do that, but it needs to be on this day, rather than just, here you go, do this. You're going to get a much more realistic duration of work and a much more accurate way of planning and executing a project. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail into kind of each of the planning approaches, and then kind of talk about how you would merge the two. So like I said, top-down approach, and it's also known as the push approach. So we talk about that push-pull planning in construction, and hopefully some of you have used it or at least aware of it. So the top-down is the push. So someone at a head office level is creating a very high-level program. It gets pushed down to the project planners, who will use something like P6, Asta, Microsoft Projects. They'll create a more, slightly more detailed master program. That gets pushed down again to the teams on site. They'll then use probably Excel or different planning software to create their own kind of micro programs or their own working programs. Now, already here, we've got 3 different parties, potentially even more, potentially different softwares. No one's talking to each other. The softwares aren't linked in any way. And that's going to cause issues because people are working in isolation. There's hardly any collaboration there at all. And like I said, with all these different programs, you've got the high level program, you've got the master program, and then you've got the kind of working programs. The planner is getting updates left, right, and center from everyone. So the planner isn't free to actually plan any of the progressively for the future of the project, or to go into a bit more detail, because they're just having to update. Now, what you find is P6, Asta, MS Project, Excel all require a lot of manual data entry, manual progress updates. So the planner's time is spent purely updating activities a lot of the time. Now, if we took that as a cost and the planner's earning a good wage, that wage could be used progressively planning the project rather than spent wasting time updating things. If we can automate that service, we've freed up the planner to go out and actually plan and execute the projects more efficiently. So this is a diagram which shows kind of the challenge of top-down planning, and the challenge is input versus output and the balance between the both. So what you've got here is an information triangle. So the planner sits at the top. Now, the planner has the maximum involvement in the planning of this project, but actually sits with probably the minimum of the information, because they're not speaking to the trades, they're not speaking to the subbies, they're not speaking to the team, probably not too familiar with the site at this moment. And at the bottom of the triangle, you've got the people who are actually going to execute the work, the workers out on site. Now, they're sat with all the information because they know all the trades. They're working on the site daily. They know the materials, everything like that. But they have minimum involvement in the actual planning of the project. So this is where we need to kind of find that balance between the two. Because at the moment, although kind of the bottom-up approach is really growing in the UK and especially overseas, we need to find that balance to get projects more efficiently executed and to have that kind of improvement of collaboration. So the challenges of the top-down approach. So whether you're doing a kind of short-term look ahead or even longer, 2 years or something like that, there's a very unrealistic chance of executing that on time because most of that plan was done with little to no evidence. The top-down approach doesn't really account for any buffers. So even a small delay, like a day or a couple of days, can actually amplify and become a really big delay towards the end of the project. I mentioned earlier that constant push of information and not collaborating with any of the teams or stakeholders and really poor communication just leads to issues. And you see it all the time, that blame game. Oh, I wasn't supposed to do this. Why was I given this activity to do today when there's no clearance? Things like that. If we can get people in a room or on a call, or probably more so on a call nowadays, we can try and identify these issues before they cause delays. And you saw those statistics at the beginning of the webinar. There are huge delays and huge costs. Even if you can improve by a couple of %, that's a lot of money hopefully being saved. And as I mentioned, that top-down approach really leads to that kind of endless loop of plan rescheduling. Because we've got so many unrealistic targets, the teams on site are giving progress and asking for things to be rescheduled just continuously, rather than being free to go execute work as well. So not only are they spending time having to reschedule everything, the planner is now having to reschedule everything himself as well. So we've got two potential parties there that are not actually executing the work they're supposed to because they're so busy kind of rescheduling and manually updating information. So again, there's massive scope for improvement. And now the bottom-up approach. And I will open the call later on for some questions and things like that. So I'd be interested to know how many people have actually used this kind of sticky note type of planning, which facilitates that bottom-up planning. So the bottom-up, which is known as the pull approach to achieving work on site, this allows the breakdown of the plan. So you do still need that top-down approach. You need someone at the beginning of a project to come up with some key milestones. You need that master program again. But then you want to introduce the bottom-up approach. You want to bring in the people on site that are going to execute the work. You're going to want to bring in the trades who know what their materials are like, what the labor's like, and how long it takes them to do their specific trade. And then you want to break down that high-level program into phases. And then you want to enable the teams to pull that work towards them. And by pull, I mean commit. So if you're breaking down these key milestones with the people that are actually going to do the work into a more accurate, achievable working program, then it's up to them to say, okay, I can do that week. I'm going to get that done. 4 days activity, I'll get that done. Now, if people are committing to their own work rather than committing to something that someone gave them to do without any information, you're going to get a much more realistic idea of them actually getting the work done, rather than here's 10 activities, go do that. No, you want their collaboration to see what they can do, what they can't do, and then you can work together to get that done. The bottom-up approach enables collaboration. So whether it's on a call, whether it's in a room, doing the sticky notes, bottom-up is essential to kind of collaboration, and vice versa. They can't go without the other. So it's important that you kind of foster that mentality and facilitate those discussions to happen if you want the bottom-up approach to really work. And the bottom-up approach, if everyone's speaking, everyone's collaborating, we're getting all the stakeholders involved, we can together review the constraints that are going to potentially stop activities or stop work being done and work through those together. And that way everyone's aware that, okay, so-and-so's got this constraint, so we might be a bit late starting our activity, or maybe we can help them because we've got so-and-so free. And that kind of collaboration will just enable things to get done much more efficiently than that conventional approach I showed earlier. So the benefits of the bottom-up approach can be huge. The teams being able to pull their own activities and to commit to their own activities gets a much more accurate way of planning than that top-down approach. Clear communication can only benefit everyone, and that bottom-up approach really enables those conversations to happen. And the input from the last planners, and last planner is don't know how many people are familiar with that kind of term, but it's a type of planning. And the last planner is basically the last person on site who's going to do the work. So you want the input of the last planner, who's the person that's actually going to be able to execute this work for you, whose team are going to be pouring the concrete or building the wall and things like that. So getting their involvement, you get a much more realistic idea of durations as well. So your plan is just bit by bit becoming much more accurate as and when you collaborate and communicate with different people. So from that previous graphic where work couldn't start on site, we've got this one now because we've introduced that bottom up approach. And now we can, you've got the gentleman there saying, we'll be ready with pour 3 in the next hour. So we can get a much more realistic target of when work is going to be done than previously. So can we stick to just one type of planning? In my experience, no. I still see a lot of contractors sticking with that top-down approach. And if you've worked one way for a number of years, it's hard to change that culture. But it is important, and I think a lot more people are aware that the bottom-up approach is getting a lot of results, okay? So I would find, and I would say that a combination of the two is very, very important. So have your very high-level program made, your key milestones identified with the client, because it's important for both parties. You don't want too many people involved in that level of kind of contractual program, because everyone wants to have their say and you'll never get anything kind of done at that point. So it's important to set out those key milestones. At that point, or when the point it gets to the kind of planners, then let's get all the teams involved one by one. We'll talk about the trades, we'll get the subcontractors in, we'll get their input. We'll even get their program and see how it sits with us. That kind of level of input and collaboration is key to getting a project successful. We'll have, no one knows better how long it will take someone to do the task than the people doing it themselves, okay? I don't know how long the plaster is going to be in apartment 2, but they'll know because they've done that day in, day out. They'll know the constraints that they'll face, drying times, things like that. So it's important to really get a combination of those two approaches and to collaborate as much as possible. So the benefits of merging both are probably quite obvious to everyone. You've got that master plan that acts as the guide, so it sets out those key milestones. Through having everyone collaborate, you've got a much more realistic idea of when targets are going to be achieved and milestones are going to be hit. And then what we've done now is we've kind of freed up the planners and the managers to focus on being able to improve performance. Whereas before, everyone was kind of trying to put out fires because we had unrealistic targets to hit, everyone was under pressure. The planner was getting programs from loads of different places, but now everyone's collaborated. He can kind of generate one source of information. Those people are now free to see, actually, where can we improve? What can we do better? So that planner isn't spending their time now on Excel or P6 or Asta updating stuff, because that's all been done collaboratively. They are now free to think, okay, where could we make these small gains? Where could we improve? Not just on this project, but maybe to the next project and things like that. So we've hopefully created enough time that people can start to improve performance rather than keep putting out fires, as I said. So how do you combine both for success? So the best model we've seen to kind of combine both of these is what's called a lean project delivery system. And this is the kind of model that we like to help implement when we go to different contractors around the world. So some of the core principles and techniques involved are, so the bottom up. So like we discussed, we want to start involving people at an early stage, the subcontractors, the different packages. That's really important. Then it's really important to defer commitments to the last responsible minute. So when we are speaking to those subcontractors and getting the last planners to commit to their activities, you don't want them to do it a year in advance because the scope of work can change dramatically in that time. But you don't want them to commit, okay, I'll do it tomorrow. You want them to commit at the last responsible moment before it could cause an issue, okay? So to make it much more efficient and things like that. And then collaboration. Collaboration is key, and I don't just mean between packages and teams and subcontractors, but also keep the client in mind. Keep collaborating with the client. What drives the value for the client? Because then you can really start to maximize the project, and the client can see a maximum value as possible. And then there's some core processes that really drive this lean project delivery system. The first of which is, I've mentioned briefly, is that make ready process. So it sounds obvious, but a week before something's due to start, put a date in their calendar or whatever that they have to make something ready. They have to check that they've got the right materials, the right tools, things like that. Because if they don't have any of those things on that day, then they've got a week to catch up. And it sounds so basic, but it's something that's really underused in construction. If we can start to do that more efficiently, we're going to really start to reduce delays. And then it's important to keep that commitment-based planning, get those people actually executing the work to commit to their own work. And then lastly, and I've said this in almost every webinar, it's important to continuously improve. So construction and the technology and the innovation and the people is constantly changing all the time. And there's so much scope to continuously improve. Even week to week on one project, you can improve, or onto the next project or the different phase. It's important to keep kind of evaluating, and I mentioned it in the last webinar, reviewing your processes and to see where you can make these small gains. The profit margins in construction are so low that if you can make some small gains here and there, then you're hopefully going to be better off. We get asked this quite a lot, and I think it was brought up in the last webinar actually, that how can we kind of start collaborating? What's the process? First and foremost, get those meetings booked in. So whether it's a Zoom call, Teams, or you can get everyone in the room, first and foremost, book a meeting in, okay? Get those people talking. To facilitate this, I would get up the milestones. So we've got, okay, we need to get the foundations done by this date. So I bring in the foundations team, I bring in probably the team that come after them, the team before them, and we know that that's the date. Then let's break that down. What are the smaller activities we need to get to meet that milestone, okay? Then once we've done that, what's next? Okay, something comes after the foundations. Is that gonna be ready? What do they need? And that's how I'd facilitate that conversation. And I think naturally, but if it doesn't happen naturally, it's very important to discuss any sort of issues, constraints. Okay, so my activity's done, but the next guy's having an issue with his activity. The next lady's got a problem with her activity. Okay, let's sit down. How can we improve that? How can we work through that constraint? And it's important to keep a log of those constraints, because you never know, someone else on that project might have that same constraint. And if they've got a log of how it was resolved, again, they can improve performance and reducing delays. I've touched upon this briefly. So this kind of last planner system is really growing in construction, especially over the last 10, 15 years. More and more people are kind of getting everyone involved. So the last planner, as I mentioned, is the person that's actually going to be physically doing the work on site, or the person in charge of that team. Okay, probably more so the person in charge of that team. Getting their involvement in each part of the planning process, or at least the kind of short-term working programs, is very important, because no one knows their job better than them. You're not going to tell them how long it's going to take them to do the job. They'll probably tell you. Okay, and it's important to kind of collaborate so everyone's perception of progress is going to be the same. Okay, and at least that way we can manage expectations. So there's this kind of phrase in the last plan system, which is should, can, will, did. So that master level program we spoke about earlier on, those kind of key milestones, that's work that should be done. Then we get to phase planning, which is a bit more short term, maybe 3 weeks ahead. That's work that can be done. Then we want kind of production plans made. So that's kind of a week ahead, the work that's going to be done that week. And that's work that will be done. And then execution is the work that's already been done. Let's review that and see what went well. And a way of measuring that kind of progress is through PPC. So I'm not sure how many people are familiar with PPC, but it stands for Percentage Plan Complete. And it's quite simply, it's how many of those activities in that production plan, that's short-term 1 week plan, did we commit to, did we achieve that we committed to? So it's a measure of how good that plan is. Now, you don't want that plan to be, you don't want that PPC to be 100% because it means you didn't plan enough activities. If you're achieving 100%, you might only have 3 or 4 activities. You want a few more. And then on the other hand, you don't want 40 to 50% PPC because that means you've got a whole load of activities that didn't get completed on time. So it's a bit of a balancing act, and we're happy to speak to people offline if they need any help with that kind of stuff. So now we need to try and get the balance between that push and the pull. So merging those two types of planning. So we've still got that contractually agreed milestone program at the beginning, still based on kind of estimation. But then when it gets pushed down to the planners, that's when we start to see the project managers pull and commit and give some information to the planners. So we've got a much more realistic program and targets. The project managers now have a much more realistic program, and the foremen and workers have much more realistic targets to achieve. So there's a much smoother collaborative approach to executing this project. And that's really important. You don't want the people that are actually doing the work to think they're up against it, against unrealistic deadlines and targets. You want them to have collaborated, and then it's off their own back to go and make sure they're hitting their own kind of commitment-based targets. So I just want to go through how VisiLean, our lean construction management software, helps find the balance between these two. So firstly, we can import your program, or you can create one from scratch using our software. We import from any of the planning softwares and Excel. And then we allow you to do that top level milestone-based planning using our Gantt view. And it forms kind of a Gantt format that everyone's probably familiar with if you've used any planning software. So that's a top-down approach, that kind of high-level program, high-level activities. Then we convert all of those activities into those sticky notes that I showed you earlier. So these are digital sticky notes. We can drag and drop these sticky notes to individuals. They'll get, based on their commitments, so they'll get a notification saying they're doing this, but it's all set up in a collaborative environment. So someone will host it, whether it's on a Zoom call or get up on a screen in a room, and all of the activities will be unassigned, and we'll get the people in the room say, okay, drag and drop me that one. I can do the foundations that week on level, well, ground floor, whatever, or I can do apartment on level 4. So getting them to commit to those activities themselves, they're going to get a much more realistic idea of progress. And it's a very visual way to look at things. Unlike a load of sticky notes, which probably fall off the wall, these are digital, they're logged. As soon as someone starts it, it updates the history log. We can go into more detail if people are interested further down the line. So the benefits of an integrated top-down and bottom-up approach are massive. So with VisiLean, we allow you to import any sort of top-down plan, and then we can facilitate the kind of platform where you can do the bottom-up approach. So we convert that Gantt view into those digital sticky notes and allow the people that are actually doing the work to commit to those sticky notes themselves in a very easy to use visual software. VisiLean enables collaboration without actually even really speaking to each other at times. VisiLean will help improve communication. If I press start on my activity on my laptop, it will automatically let someone else on the project know that I've started. So again, I haven't picked up a phone or an email or filled out a form or a spreadsheet, but my communication has improved because someone else is aware of what I'm doing. So it's that kind of automation that the planner would have had to do manually, or someone would have had to pick up a phone, that we're now facilitating automatically and saving time. we don't want to add to that 45% of non-value adding time that we saw earlier. We want to reduce that and allow the planners, the managers, and the workers just to go out and execute the project. I don't want to be wasting time filling out a spreadsheet if my job's to go plan this project. And VisiLean's got a whole suite of lean production management tools. We've got a make ready process, so you can assign a make ready date to each activity, and then someone will get a notification on their phone saying, okay, you need to go make sure you're ready to start foundations today. Okay, then they make it ready, sends the next person an alert saying they can start their activity, and it's all automated. So again, we've improved communication hopefully that way. Some lean features, and I know I can see some of the guests here have used VisiLean before, and some of our clients are here, and some people that are kind of part of this kind of lean world that we're all part of. So some of the lean features that VisiLean has. So we've got complete flexibility. Whether you want to do that top-down Gantt style planning approach, you can do that. If you want to do the bottom-up approach, you can do that. We've even got our own live version of Excel in the system. So if you're comfortable using Excel, you can use that way. We've got that dedicated make ready process. So you can't, if you turn this feature on, you can't start your activity until you've made it ready. Okay, so again, you get the notification, okay, go check the materials, the labor, things, everything's good to go. Only once you press that they're all ready, can you start that activity? And it alerts everyone if they're not ready and if they are ready. So again, communication, a bit more transparency on a project rather than everyone working separately. We facilitate through our scheduler that commitment-based planning. So that sticky notes, that platform will allow people on a call in a room to commit and visualize and then commit their own activities. So I've got all of the activities, I can see them, I can see if there's any clashes, I can see the status of them, I can see the predecessors. And once you've got all that information and everyone's in the room talking, then you can make realistic targets and commitments to actually executing the work. And on VisiLean, we've got seamless handovers. So basically one person finishes their activity, straight away the next person will get a notification that they're good to go. And because of that make ready process, they've probably checked the week before that everything's good to go, or that it's looking like it's going to finish on time, so I can start mine. So we've got that whole process built into VisiLean. Just this diagram is just a simple kind of breakdown of the workflow of VisiLean. So firstly, someone somewhere needs to decide that they want to improve efficiency at their company or look at a new way of doing something. Then we can import their program, or they can create it from scratch in VisiLean and create that top level program. From that, we can take the milestones. The milestones then get moved into kind of our weekly work plans, where the scheduler will allow people to visualize and commit to their own work. Work is just continuously being executed on the site. People are using mobile apps to update their activities, which is telling the software the updates automatically, which in the past would have been done via spreadsheets or Excel or phone calls. All of that data has been fed to our dashboard, which is allowing the project managers, the planners to review the project more efficiently. And then lastly, we've got all of that data to improve performance. And that, again, I can't drum into people enough that there's so much room to improve continuously, not just at the end of a project. You can improve from one day to the next and try and make those small gains wherever you can. And this is one of my favorite topics. So we could have the best software in the world, and you could have, or you could pick the best planning method, however you want to do it. But without the right behaviors of the company, without the right processes, without the right people, those things won't come together, and they won't be aligned, and they won't work. It's very important that you align the right process with the right technology, with the right software and the right people to really start to see some gains and efficiency and productivity growth. That is everything from me. I appreciate I've been speaking at you for 40 minutes. So if anyone's got any questions, you can type them. I think I can turn on a question feature here. But if anyone's got any questions, you can type them in the chat box, and I'll invite some of the experts on VisiLean to answer them if I can't. But thank you everyone for your time. So we've got about 20 minutes. This needs to end at 3:30. So if anyone's got any questions, let me know. So thank you, Kieran. Can I take you through PPC? Yes, I can. So PPC stands for Percentage Plan Complete. And basically, it's a measure of how good your short-term planning is. So if we speak about those production plans, those kind of week in advance plans, okay, what we're measuring with PPC is how many activities in that week finished in that week. So let's say, for example, we've got next week 10 activities, and only 5 of those finished. So PPC would be finished in that week. PPC would be 50%. Okay. So if I finished activities the week before or the week after, they will be unsuccessful and won't contribute to PPC. So PPC will be low. Okay. So it's a measure of how good your short-term planning is. And people kind of find it difficult to understand that if finishing early doesn't contribute to PPC, why is it bad? Well, early on some construction projects is just as bad as late, okay? Because not everyone's ready, not everyone's prepared, materials might not be there. Do you know what I mean? We're gonna have people, labor waiting around and things like that. So what it is a measure of how accurately you can plan short term. So we want 10 activities to be finished in that week. We want at least 8 or 9 to be done. Okay, you're never probably going to get 100% because it's unrealistic, but as close to 80, 90% is really good. Hopefully that answered the question for you. Do we see much difference between your clients on how they balance the top-down versus bottom-up planning? Yeah, I mean, it varies from client to client. Obviously, certain companies have worked their way for a number of years. So sometimes it's ingrained in that company to still do that top-down approach, or to only kind of get the last planners involved later on in the process. But that's something that we work with the companies when we go out there to try and improve and facilitate those discussions between those people. And to try and kind of improve that whole process. But I mean, no company has the right or wrong answer, really. It's just a matter of preference and what works for them. Depending on the supply chain, depending on the subcontractors you're working with, sometimes it's not possible to bring people in at a very early stage, or you're not sure the information you're getting from them is accurate. So it's all about what people are comfortable with, I think. Can I show a sample of the dashboard prepared using this VisiLean? I can't share one now because I haven't got anything prepared, but I can send something to you offline and give you an example of how it would work. Sorry about that. A few more people typing, so we've got a few more questions. Although I don't, yeah, so we are finding the bottom-up approach really helps to engage the supply chain. Yeah, I mean, no one wants to be told what to do at the end of the day, really, or no one really enjoys that. So if you can get the engagement and get them to give you their own programs and make them feel like they're in charge, then yeah, you're going to get a much more engaged subby or supply chain, definitely. So just going back to Nikhil, if you see the comments there, we can provide you with kind of a demo VisiLean so you can see the dashboard up and running. But essentially the dashboard is all completely automated. It's a list of delayed tasks, stop tasks, different things, PPC. Sure. So Nikhil and Hane, hopefully I pronounced that right. Sorry. My colleague James will be in touch with you to arrange some demos. Does this have a feature to represent the resource required? We have to use software such as Primavera to represent the resource required. So this is something we're working on at the moment. We do have a feature called custom fields where you can allocate the resource there. It depends what kind of resource you're talking about. You can assign these to teams and packages in VisiLean, or you can import that directly from P6 already assigned. But if it's different types of resource like materials and things like that, then you can add a custom field for that. There's loads of different ways we can try and look at that for you. I just need to understand a bit more probably what you mean.
Question. We do document resources in terms of manpower. So you can put down plan workforce for each and every activity and document the actuals as well directly from site using the mobile app. And so you can review your plan versus actual workforce. And we have even exclusive COVID-related features that we develop for safe workforce density tracking. So yes, we do include resources in terms of manpower very effectively. But if there's anything else, like Seb mentioned, that we don't, in terms of some specific materials, then those can be always created on custom fields.
Thanks, Andy. So, Liang, got a question again. I hope I pronounced it right. Does the information provisioning go back to P6? So, yes. So, there's a couple of ways of doing it. So, I'll invite Andy to answer this one again, but we're working on a direct link if it's not already there at the moment. That's what we're working on for a while. If not there, take it to Excel and then put it to P6. You can export out of that Excel into P6. But we are working directly. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Is that better? Yeah, I don't know.
We do, Leanne, while we get her back, we do have the info flowing back to P6 from VisiLean. So we import your P6 programs, and then we can take, you can work on those programs on VisiLean, and then you can take those updates back into P6 and then get a new rescheduled program back into VisiLean as well. So the system speaks to P6 so that both, like we mentioned in the webinar, that the top-down and the bottom-up approach actually work together hand in hand.
Can you hear me now? Pramjeet? Okay, so you can hear me now. Perfect. So if anyone's got any, sorry about that, I don't know what happened. So if anyone's got any questions or anything like that, feel free. We've got a few more minutes left, but hopefully this has been useful for people. Thanks, Nikhil. Yeah, I mean, the resource stuff is something we're kind of adding more and more to all the time. And what we do is we really work with our clients to find out what value they'll take from it and what they need. And then every 2 weeks or so, we add new features. So some features we can add quite quickly. Other things might take a lot longer. depending on the kind of scope of work needed. But most of our clients have features that are specifically added for them or they ask for, and then hopefully all of our other clients are benefiting from that as well. So we do really take on board what people need and want, and then we try and our best to make that happen. So I'll leave the room open for a few more minutes if anyone's got any questions, but if not, thanks everyone for joining. I really appreciate it. I've seen a lot of familiar faces and new faces as well, so it's really good that we're hopefully keeping everyone engaged. Thanks, Liang. Thanks, Nikhil.